I'm Sam,
And this is Gabe.
and this is Coaster Wars.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Coaster Wars podcast. And we're back with part 2 of the Son of Beast 2-part mini-series. Is that what we're calling this?
I guess that's what it is.
2-part mini-series, 2 episodes, I guess. Well, now we have to do a 3rd episode. No, I'm kidding.
No.
But where did we leave off? Let's let you recap. Let's recap.
So in the previous episode, we basically did an overview of basically the entire situation that kind of led up to building the Son of Beast. We talked about Coaster Wars itself. We talked about the original Beast and the kind of legacy that left behind. We talked about how Kings Island had just been bought by Premier, and so they were looking to upgrade their park. We talked about RCCA and kind of the shady way that they did deals with parks to build their roller coasters. And then we got into the Rattler and Fiesta Texas and kind of the issues with that ride and how Fiesta Texas kind of knew about them, but also didn't really tell people. And that was a whole shady situation in and of itself. And so you have this big, tumultuous melting pot leading to the disaster that is the building of Son of Beast. And here we are to talk about one of the most infamous rides in the roller coaster world and the absolute just entire thing that this ride is, because it's a whole thing, and we're gonna get into it.
You know, I'm pretty sure Babe Ruth said it best. Heroes get remembered, but legends never die. And that's what this coaster is a legend. Did Babe Ruth actually say that, or was that just a quote from The Sandlot? I don't know. I really don't.
Let's look it up afterwards.
Yes. Sorry, guys. That was a little weird. Anyway. The Son of Beast, the 7,000 foot long, 218 foot tall monstrosity. So this coaster was announced, you said 1999?
Yep.
And obviously, immediately, people are super, super excited, especially because the original Beast was such a good and well done roller coaster and was legendary night rides. So let's talk about one of the very first issues was, let's just compare the two coasters. How does that sound?
Yeah, sounds good.
So obviously the Son of Beast was taller and faster. However, the original Beast was still slightly longer.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest main difference between the two roller coasters was the setting. Yep. So the Beast is famous for its setting, being set back way in the back of the park. There's really nothing else around. You can't see anything else back there. It's wooded. It's, sealed off from the rest of the park. It just feels isolated. It feels like you're alone back there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Son of Beast was a drastically different thing. See, in order to build this roller coaster, they had to clear a ton of trees because it was very helix focused.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to do that, or when that happened, you lost that same effect the original Beast had of being isolated. You could see the rest of the park. You were very close to other roller coasters. And for that reason, some people really did not like it. They said it did not feel like the original. They preferred the original over this roller coaster. And that's the other thing, too, is that this roller coaster took the original helix of the original Beast and then just copied and pasted. I mean, let's just be honest here. They just went copy, paste, and then they just moved the slider down and made it bigger. Well, it's because the original Beast, and most people's favorite part of that ride is the helix at the end of the ride. So then when they were building this, they said, why don't we just do that 4 times? And that's how you
literally actually
the Son of Beast. I wish I was joking, but that's literally what they did, hoping that people would love the Son of Beast some more. Let me ask you, Sam, as a Beast lover, which coaster do you think you'd like more? And we're saying Son of Beast, brand new, fresh, like first year operating.
Don't think it would matter. I still think I would like the Beast better.
You still think you'd like the Beast better?
Yeah.
Part of me would agree with you, and part of me is just like, this thing is a hyper wooden roller coaster. how could I not pick it? Like, you know what I mean?
I do. I very much see the appeal of Son of Beast, and like me picking the Beast is just because I love that roller coaster so freaking much. It's not even funny kind of deal. So but I do think in its like first week of operation with fast trains, fresh track, it would have been a pretty spectacular ride. It's kind of one of those things where you're like, I wish I could have been there to ride it the first week that it opened, and then just never rode it after.
And before we dive too deep into what the Son of Beast is, we do have to talk about the construction a little bit because there are two major interesting events that happened during the construction of this roller coaster. Number one, Sam will be able to talk about, right? Or do I got to talk about
Which one
both
are
of
you
them?
talking about?
The part where it fell over.
Oh no, you're gonna have to talk about that. I'm sorry to talk. I didn't do any research on that. I do know that it happened, but the one
Oh,
I,
okay.
yeah,
So
you,
and this should have been a warning. This should have been like a hey, something's definitely wrong here. But during the construction process of Son of Beast, they actually had a event where a windstorm came through. And what I mean by a windstorm, I think they said like 50-mile-an-hour winds. So something that the structure should have been able to withstand. And it actually knocked over, I think it was like 200-foot section of track, like knocked it completely over, like the track, the supports, and
oh
everything.
yeah,
And the excuse that Kings Island used is that it was being held up by temporary supports. It wasn't fully like permanent yet, and
mm-hmm,
that's why it fell over. However, obviously, down the future of this roller coaster, that definitely should have been a warning and a major red flag for Kings Island. But they continue with the construction process anyway. It's just an interesting little thing that even before this roller coaster was fully built, it was already having structural issues. And that's what's going to eventually lead to this ride's downfall. The second part is, and this comes out later, RCCA actually gets fired from the
yep,
construction of this roller coaster. See, you do know about that part though?
I do because that's what
Okay.
spawns the first lawsuit.
Yes. And basically what happened was is during the off season, some of these structural integrity issues must have been discovered by Kings Island, and they fired RCCA from the project and tried to finish this project in-house, like the
Mm-hmm.
original Beast. And now and that's kind of where this becomes a he said she said issue because that's what RCCA said. Hey, you guys actually fired us from this. We didn't build this roller coaster.
Yep.
And Kings Island said, well, yeah, but you designed it and like did all the engineering side of things, so you're still held responsible. All we did was fire you from the construction process. But
Yeah.
that also leads into another issue of the lumber that was used, and I'm sure you can also talk about that. Why don't you talk about those two things, those two lawsuits, the lumber lawsuit and the construction one?
Okay, so the first lawsuit that spawned from the Son of Beast began in November of 2000. Now, keep in mind, this thing opened in 2000, so it was
Yes.
relatively, it was the same
So
year
hold
that
on,
it opened.
real little pause here. This roller coaster is still operating, being
Yeah,
run by the park while these lawsuits are being put into effect. They never shut the coaster down. They never fixed the coaster. They didn't do anything with the coaster other than build it.
yep.
And they're still operating the coaster. Sorry, I just had to add that.
No, it's pertinent to the story. So Kings Island starts by suing well, technically RCCO because Roller Coaster Corporation of Ohio is technically the company that built this ride, but just for sake of simplicity, I'm going to call them RCCA. So Kings Island was suing RCCA and Wooden Structures Incorporated, which was the lead structural engineer that was hired by RCCA. There is a whole list of like fancy legal terms that described like it was like a breach of contract and this, that, and the other thing. But it basically boiled down to shoddy engineering and construction on this roller coaster. This also, but as Gabe was describing, this also included the Universal Forest Products, which is the company that provided the wood for this roller coaster, claiming subpar wood. So RCC fought. RCCA fought back. They said exactly what Gabe said. They claimed they were fired halfway through construction, and Kings Island just wanted to save money. And they also ignored construction and safety advice by RCCA. Also, note that was after they were fired, apparently. And they even tried countersuing. So, Kings Island initially won the suit for about $20 million. It went on to appeals court and it was eventually overturned. But part of the reason that that happened is if anybody knows anything about the legal process, it's very, very, very slow.
Yes.
So 5 years later, after the start of this suit, RCCA goes bankrupt. So even if because Kings Island initially won, they can't really collect their $20 million because RCCA just literally doesn't have any money. So Kings Island starts going after the insurance company. I'm just going to call them the insurance company because on two different articles, I found two different names for the company. So I'm just going to call them the insurance company. So first, RCCA, the whole thing started. So first, RCCA notified the insurance company of the lawsuit, and the insurance company denied what is called their duty to represent. I don't know exactly what that means, but I'm assuming that, like, to protect their own interests, they could help represent RCCA in court. So then RCCA goes bankrupt and they file a claim with the insurance company to pay the $20 million. Well, the claim is denied. So then RCCA files a suit against the insurance company to be like, hey, no, you need to pay this. So then, at the end, when everything worked out, basically the $20 million that Kings Island was supposed to be owed was overturned in appeals court. So basically, from what I understand of my very little knowledge of civil law, is that it came out in a wash that RCCA didn't owe Kings Island, but they also Kings Island didn't owe payments like contract payments back to RCCA either. And then when it came to the whole insurance thing, I guess RCCA got what was called a commercial general liability policy, which its intended purpose is to cover injuries to persons or damages to persons' properties if there is an incident. So, what's not covered is the actual construction or design of whatever they were building or their property. So, like a very basic breakdown of that is if there had been an accident due to the shoddy construction, the insurance company would have paid for like medical bills and stuff like that. They did not cover the shitty construction itself. So that was only the first lawsuit spawned by this roller coaster.
Yes. And like I said, keep in mind this coaster is still operating. It's still running
Yeah.
trains down the track. People are still riding it. And I understand, like you said, the legal process is slow and drawn out. But you think at some point, Kings Island, being a Paramount Park at the time, would have said, maybe we should shut this thing down.
Yeah.
Like, and that leads into some more lawsuits. I do know because at some point somebody says, "Hey, isn't Kings Island kind of also liable for operating a coaster they knew was structurally unsound?"
Oh yeah.
Like,
Another thing I also want to point out is people like ask about, well, like, doesn't the state of Ohio have to also like
oh,
safety check
yes.
this thing?
Yes. And that is
So
true.
it is
That is
true,
true.
but what the caveat here is this falls under somehow the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And they do tech
Farming.
yes.
Farmers.
And they
Not
do
engineers.
yes, they do have engineers, but they're not roller coaster engineers. And in a later lawsuit against somebody filed against Kings Island because they were injured on the ride, they literally in court testimonials, the ODA, which I'm going to shorten is the Ohio Department of Agriculture, literally quoted, we aren't roller coaster engineers. We thought it was safe, but we have no prior knowledge to be like, well, it's not roller coaster safe.
Basically, they could look at it and go, yeah, it's a roller coaster, and that's about it. Like, they couldn't
Yes.
say if it was a good one, a bad one, if it was structurally safe, it was not if it was not structurally safe. All they could do is
Yes.
look at it and physically say, well, all the bolts are tight and all the wood is still there, so it must be all right. They
Yep.
don't have the structural engineering knowledge that a would roller coaster manufacturers required to have to build these things? Like
Exactly.
I said in the last episode, typically that is outsourced to separate companies. However, if you outsource to a company that doesn't specialize in roller coaster engineering, you're going to get shoddy design. Like, it's just how it's going to be, because there are certain things that you have to know about. You have to be able to manage ride forces throughout. You have to be able to manage wear and tear throughout the seasons. You have to be able to manage the, fluctuating weights of each train, and how, some riders are heavier, some riders are lighter. What's the max weight we can put on this track before it's going to collapse? And
Hmm.
and that's the thing, is during the design process and inspection, everybody that was doing that part of the engineering was not qualified to do it.
Oh
And
yeah.
that leads to a lot of the issues that we see with this coaster and the Son of Beast.
Another thing I do want to point out is apparently our CCA did consult Stengel Engineering. Now, I had no idea who this was before we started this whole
Yes.
endeavor, but basically, Stengel Engineering was run or created by Werner Stengel, and he is way super well known in the roller coaster world. He invented the cloth-eyed loop, which is a modern day roller coaster loop. You find it on every single modern roller coaster that has a vertical loop. And he also came up with the concept of heart lining. But the thing, so you think, oh my gosh, this guy, he knows what the hell he's doing. This coaster should never have been this bad. Well, if you actually look on their website, they offer a number of different services. And so I got this from El Toro Ryan's video on this. He does a great video on this. Basically, he speculates that they only were consulted to calculate the ride forces that were going to be applied to the riders themselves, which is one of the services offered on their website, and that's all they were consulted for. And as thus, that's how this coaster was this bad.
Yeah. It was not great. Not good. Definitely not good.
And
But
like, so now
obviously,
that's just the construction. So, like,
yes.
why don't you
So
get into what
now,
this ride actually was?
yeah, so now we get into the opening of the roller coaster in first ridership. It was opened for a solid 12 hours. Believe it or not, it didn't last very long with the initial opening. In fact, well, actually, the initial opening was delayed by several weeks due to the windstorm and the
Mm-hmm.
falling of the track. Kings Island cited that it was heavy rain in the spring season, but obviously that was not the case. They were trying to fix the roller coaster before they opened it. So yeah, it opened late, and then it opened for like literally 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, during the operations, they were already discovering track issues and stuff. In fact, they cited several rough patches and one spot that was particularly bad that a lot of riders complained about
Mm-hmm.
being a speed bump esque moment. And so they shut down the ride, and it was closed. I can't remember for how long. I believe it was a few months. And they reopened it, but they only reopened it with one train operations, and they were already trying to prevent structural issues. And the thought process was, if we're running less trains on the track, we're running less cycles.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, there's just less wear and tear on the track. However, there was a big issue with this. When this thing opened, it was actually pretty popular. I mean, it was the tallest, fastest, and longest, second longest wooden roller coaster in the world. So, of
Mm-hmm.
course, people are going to be drawn out to ride this thing. So, it was always full. The wait was always long. And now you're running one train ops. 3 hours to ride this thing. And people were waiting it. So, obviously, it had to be somewhat good, right?
Yep. Right?
Right? Should I talk about the layout? Is this the time?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the Son of Beast started out with a small pre-lift section. It featured a couple of turns and a small airtime pop. One interesting thing that I learned about this roller coaster, though, I thought was pretty neat, is as you were departing the station, you could actually view the vertical loop. Spoiler alert. um, there was a
Right?
vertical loop on this roller coaster, and you could see it as you were departing the station. It was just like a little like prelude to what is to come. But after that, you would climb the 218-foot tall lift hill, and you would crest the top, and get a great view of the greater Kings Island area. I mean, at the time, this was probably the tallest roller coaster at the park, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, and the other thing too is because of where this was situated out in the back near the beast, the lift hill faced the park. So when you crest over the top, the whole park was in front of you.
And with that, you'd actually go into a small pre-drop on a wooden roller. Who would have thought? Basically, it just kind of drops down and banks and turns to the left before popping up into that initial drop, which we quoted at 214 feet. That is just, I'm sorry, that's just insane. Like,
It
who
is.
okayed that?
Mhm.
Seriously, they should have, somebody somewhere should have went, hey, this has never been done before, and there's probably a reason for it. Like, not a single person went, we really should think about this.
In the
Hey,
great words.
I'll do
Oh,
another movie quote.
yes.
They they always, how does it go? They
They
always
were too
thought,
busy trying to figure
yes,
out if they could. They didn't stop to think if they should.
should. We're movie quoting this week.
Yeah, this whole thing is a movie. Like this is
Oh
cannot
yeah,
be
that's
real
right.
life, and it just is.
So anyway, you would pull up into a cresting major turn that popped up into a hill. God, I can't talk. And that's where that initial speed bump was the banking was kind of like a little janky, and basically you get like shook side to side as you exited the first pullout into this first drawn out top. And then you would drop down into the first helix, which was a left hand helix. Basically, you decline all the way towards the ground, speed up, and turn up and head back towards the air in a helix fashion, very similar to the original helix on the original Beast. And you would go around, I would be leave 2 times before popping up into the mid-course brake run. One interesting thing about this mid-course brake run is it featured brakes and tire drives. Now the
Hmm.
reason for this is because they required a very specific speed to enter and exit the loop to make it safe. So if the train was going too fast, it would pull the brakes and slow you down. And if the train was going too slow, not to make it through the loop, they would speed you up with the tire drives. So after
Gives you
that, you would drop
confidence.
down into the over 100-foot tall vertical loop, which, let me just say, why was this the idea? Like, they could have done anything. I mean, they could have done any inversion, corkscrews, barrel rolls, anything. And they're like, you know what? Let's just do 110-foot tall vertical loop. Because
Sounds good.
why not? Definitely something RCCA would be like, yeah, we can do that. I want to
Yeah,
make sure I got that height right.
exactly.
Um, oh, it doesn't have the height of the loop.
It does on RCDB.
It
You're looking for
does.
the height of the loop, right? You have to scroll all the way
Yeah.
down to the bottom, I think. I've seen it, I
Uh,
swear.
118 feet. Sorry, I was a
Yeah.
little off. So yeah, it was an 118-foot tall vertical loop. That's taller than like most wooden roller coasters' first drops, and that was like the fourth element on this ride.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing to note is the structure for the vertical loop was
Thank you.
steel, but the track was maintained as wood all the way through, thus giving this a full wooden roller coaster layout. I know it's kind of a cheat. It is actually very much a cheat, but because it was technically still a wooden track, that makes this still technically a wooden roller coaster. So
Small note
after,
before Gabe continues. People did say this remained the smoothest part of the roller coaster, and it was most likely because it was the most stable part of the roller
because it was
coaster.
actually structurally sound, huh? Who would have
Yeah.
thought?
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on, you would pop up to the top of the second massive helix, and this is a banking to the right, turning to the right helix. Same thing, you would bank to the right, plunge towards the ground before popping up and finishing the helix. This one would go around a total of about 1.5 to 2 times. Same thing. So that's why we say it was kind of like 4 helixes. But after that, you'd pop up into an airtime hill that was very long and drawn out and did not do anything force wise before banking and turning to the left before going into another small helix. This would send you underneath a wood structure and underneath the first lift hill, and you would pop up into the final brakes. So it was a very simple layout. It was a very long and drawn out layout. Some would say it was boring. Some would say it was intense. Some would say it was so rough I don't remember. um, so yeah, that is the Son of Beast as a layout. Like I said, they really tried to redo the Helix section on the Son of Beast. I think I would like it because it would be a very forceful roller coaster. Also, the first drop sounds really interesting to me.
Yeah.
And the vertical loop, I mean, come on. Like, this just screams like Schwarzkopf to me. I don't know why.
Yes, it
But
does.
I guarantee you that thing was pulling some forces. They have it listed as a max of 4.5 G forces, and that leads to another issue. So the designer of the trains was a Premier,
Yep.
and they did not design these trains for 4.5 Gs. It was a wooden roller coaster. Wooden roller coasters don't do that.
No.
So this led to another reason why they took the second train off the track was because they needed spare parts for the other train. So
Well,
that was
and
another issue that they were seeing with this coaster was the trains weren't handling the forces it was pulling.
in addition to that, these trains, so that they could make it through that loop and be fast enough to cover the loop, they were really freaking heavy. I don't remember the exact numbers, but Alto Orion in his video was explaining like the cumulative weight of the train was something like 10 tons. And he's like, yeah, sure, steel coasters run trains that heavy, not wooden ones. It's not made, wooden coasters aren't made to stand up to that literally just that much weight covering that many G's. It just baffles
But
me every
yes,
time.
so basically you have a very, very heavy train traveling on a track that is not structurally sound.
Nope.
And with that, obviously there's going to be some accidents. Sam, you did some more research on this than I did. There were several incidents during the time period, but let's talk about like the major two.
Oh, so the major two that I have are the June 9th, 2006 one, and then the one in 2009.
Yes, those.
Okay.
Well, let's talk about the 2006 and then so.
Okay. So I do want to point this out that in 2005, they did reduce the train cars from 6 cars to 5 cars to try and help with that weight. But of course, that didn't help very much. So on June 9th of 2006, this is to keep in mind, this is 9 days after CD Fair closed the deal and bought the park. Literally 9 days. And there was a critical failure in the Rolls Bowl. One of the wooden supports actually splintered and completely broke, causing a 5-inch sag in the track. Now I know that doesn't sound like much, but in the roller coaster world, it's practically a mile. So basically, what happened is they sent one train through and it caused the initial failure, but that train really didn't feel anything. So they sent a second train through, and that train, when it hit that 5-inch sag, it basically was like, I want to say a speed bump, but it wasn't a speed bump. It felt more like the whole train jerked, and it was akin to a car crash. So when that train made it back into the station, the operators saw the riders and went, "Oh, um, something is not right." So then they stopped a train on the lift hill. So emergency services had to be called in to get the people off the lift hill, and then the 27 riders on the train that went through the defect, all of them were sent to the hospital. Most of them left within a couple hours with just minor injuries, but there were a few people that did have to stay. None of the injuries were life threatening, but I do believe one of the people did actually have to get shoulder surgery because of it. And after this incident, they closed down the roller coaster. It was closed for the rest of the 2006 season. It spurred another investigation by the ODA, And they also brought in a separate company called SEA Limited. Now, SEA Limited is literally a forensic engineering company, and they specialize in failure investigations. Now, they found that they're due to fixes that Kings Island had been doing to the ride to make it more structurally sound, it had caused an increased pressure on singular points within the ride, and it caused extra pressure, and that's what caused this failure. After an eval of the entire ride, they found the same defect that happened here and 50 other places on the roller coaster. And then in addition, they found an entirely separate defect that the ride would need an entirely new re-evaluation to see if that defect also existed in other places in the ride. And honestly, after the other one was found 50 times, I have a sneaking suspicion it probably would have been found in more places. So
Yes.
in addition, the ride would reopen for the 2007 season, but they would have new trains. They were Gerstlauer trains from a ride called the Hurricane, which was a coaster, Custom Coasters International roller coaster, defunct because theme park Myrtle Beach had actually closed down. They were much lighter trains, so they ended up taking out the loop. There was now, I think it was a Bunny Hill in place of the loop, and they had hopes that it would make it smoother, but in reality it just made the roughness of the coaster even worse, and it also reduced capacity of the roller coaster.
Yeah, the biggest issue was because of the original trains were so heavy, it would actually absorb some of the roughness, some of the bumps. It would basically stay planted on the track well and would ride through it. Basically, think of it like driving a small car versus a large SUV. Yes, the large SUV is heavier and it takes more energy to move it, but it's going to absorb some of those impacts and some of those bumps as you're driving down the road, where a little car, some of the smaller bumps will be enough to bump it around and shake you around. So it's the same concept. The lighter trains basically revealed how rough this coaster actually was. And the other part too is a lot of people were disappointed when they took out the vertical loop, because
Yep.
that was the highlight of the ride. That was their favorite part, was the vertical loop. That was what set this thing apart from all of the other wooden roller coasters in the world. And now that that was gone, it was like, well, now it's not worth riding it, and also it's a way rougher experience.
Oh yeah. So then the ride operated for the 2007 and 2008 season with these shorter, these lighter Gerstlauer trains. But then on June 16th of 2009, the ride closed once again, and this one was kind of without much of an announcement. But it eventually, I don't know if it came out or if Cedar Fair themselves released this information. A woman had claimed that riding Son of Beast had caused a brain aneurysm. Now, if you don't know what a brain aneurysm is, it's basically one of her vessels in her brain ended up bursting, and she was actually admitted to the ICU. She did not die. She did survive. And at first, Cedar Fair was like, well, this is kind of weird because she didn't report the injury until June, and she'd ridden the course roller coaster back in May. And it was like a little bit like, did she really get it from the roller coaster? But still, the ride closed down and it never reopened. And it kind of was just sitting there in limbo. And then Cedar Fair around the 2010 time started removing it from their maps, started removing it from their websites, and this thing remained closed and dormant for 3 years before Cedar Fair finally announced its demolishment, and it was finally torn down in 2012. As sort of like a statement about the ride, Cedar Fair did state that they'd spent roughly $30 million on trying to maintain this ride, and the ride itself, when initially built, cost $15 million. So basically, they spent double what the ride initially cost trying to maintain it. So that was basically the end of the beast. It was torn down, it was gone. Some people were sad, some people were like, good riddance. And I'm sure Cedar Fair was glad to see it go. But I will say this, the ride is not actually completely gone. They did not like completely try to erase it from their history. The legacy kind of lives on in Banshee, which took the land plot of where Son of Beast used to be. And it's was one of the largest inverts at the time. And Gabe can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it might still be the longest invert.
Yeah, so the two kind of really cool things that they did is, I believe they kept one of the original cars from the original premiere trains, and they used that during their Halloween event. They also reused the station for Son of Beast as another kind of haunted area for their Halloween events.
Yep.
But they also have a memorialized tombstone in the graveyard for the ride for Banshee. They have an internal flame burning, and it has the dates that the Beast operated, so from 2000 to 2009. So they memorialized this roller coaster. They understood that some people really did love it. I think the reason they did it though is because it really embodied the roller coaster enthusiast. This thing was just
It
a
did.
stat monster. It was built. It was so intense. It was a crazy, out of control ride experience. And I think a lot of people that did get to initially ride it, they'll never forget this thing.
Mhm.
So I think that is a really cool thing that they did, is that they did memorialize it with that
Oh, yeah.
tombstone and the internal flame that burns for it.
I mean, when Son of Beast opened, I think the actual list it broke was a total of 10 records. And of course, it
Yeah,
was the
yeah.
tallest, the fastest, the steepest, the only one roller coaster at the time to have a vertical loop. And then, like, I forget what all the other ones were, but because they had this one and the Beast, which were both huge, monstrous, super long wooden roller coasters, Kings Island at the time had the most wooden roller coaster track in one park. That was another record that it broke. So,
Yeah.
and Gabe's so right. To be able to ride the only hyper wooden roller coaster, to ride the only one with a vertical loop, like it's kind of one of those things where it would have just been cool to say you'd ridden this thing.
But yeah, so basically from 2000 to 2006, though, this roller coaster operated when it should not have been. That's one of the other kind of like perfect storm things, is that because those lawsuits took so long, it allowed it to operate, it allowed it to decline in quality over the years, and it led to some unfortunate events of people getting injured. And then Cedar Fair is purchasing this park and this roller coaster, and then they find out, literally, like Sam said, 9 days later, what they got, and they had to quickly scramble and try to figure something out. The fact that this thing was able to reopen for another 2 years is kind of crazy. That being said, I don't know if it should have ever reopened personally. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's the perfect storm of what the Beast was.
Hold
Was it
on, hold
just,
on. I have one more incident to talk about, the or lawsuit, sorry.
oh,
So I didn't get a chance to mention this before, and the Gabe did bring up the accidents and the injuries. So there were 5 lawsuits brought against Kings Island after the 2006 incident. About from the 27 riders, 5 of them brought lawsuits against Kings Island. Now, 4 of them did settle out of court for compensation and punitive damages, but one of them did go to trial. Now, Kings Island lost. They had to pay $76,000 in compensation, adjusted for inflation, it's about $118,000. And then punitive. What I find interesting about this is punitive was settled out of courts, and basically, what we think happened is by settling that outside of court, it prevented jurors from hearing testimony by a guy named Rick Schmize, I think. He was one of the engineers for the ODA, and he claimed, his testimony was that he claimed Kings Island knew about the issues with the ride since 2000. And he said that when they initially closed that ride, like Gabe said, in like the first 12 hours of operation to fix a small section of track that was really, really rough, he claims that it was more than that. And that they knew about the structural issues that caused excess sway, and that led to cracking in the wood and loosening of bolts. And that Kings Island just did band aid fixes and did not actually address the issues. So that was really interesting to think about, is that they settled outside of court so that courts didn't hear his testimony.
yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with that. Is, I mean, unfortunately, there are some things that happen in the roller coaster world that make you feel unsafe. But this kind of leads back to what I said in the last episode with the Rattler. How do you open and debut a brand new roller coaster that is structurally unsound? How do you tell your guests that and expect them to be feeling safe while riding the other roller coasters at your
Mhm.
park? If this is unsafe, what else is? Is the original Beast unsafe?
Oh, yeah.
At the time the racer was also there, is that unsafe? Are our steel coasters unsafe? So they're not going to obviously come out and be like, hey, guess what? This roller coaster is actually not capable of running. And
Mhm.
that's really unfortunate because then it did operate for 6 years, and who knows, maybe something else would have happened, you know, something could have happened in that time period, or if it like an accident didn't happen in 2006, who knows how long it would have operated until, and maybe something worse would have happened. Maybe the
Oh,
whole structure would have gone just poof.
absolutely.
So so it is a very unfortunate thing. Obviously, Kings Island definitely messed up in the process of operating this roller coaster, but there's a lot of other mess ups that happened as well.
Yes.
But it just goes to show that even these multi-million-dollar money exchanges between a roller coaster design corporation and a amusement park, that even in that level there are still shady stuff going on. There's still people trying to take advantage of other people, and it's just kind of a really sad story at the end of the day. However, we get a really interesting and cool story to talk about. And yeah, this coaster is just like I said, it's a legend, and it'll
Yes.
live on for a very, very long time.
Yes. So there you go. That is our Son of Beast episode, or our mini series, I guess. We're finally recorded it. It's finally done with. So with that, where do we go from here? Where is the podcast
I
heading?
don't know. I think we
So
just end. This is it. This is the last episode. We can't do better than this.
no, because we have two very cool episodes coming up and they
Yes.
directly play off this special episode. So our next episode is going to be defunct coasters you wish you could have ridden. So me and Gabe are bringing two coasters. Mine, honestly, I know nothing about at this moment in time. I'm going to have to do some research.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Gabe picked it out for me. So, but it sounds really cool. And then after that, we're going to talk about defunct coasters we have ridden because me and Gabe have both ridden a couple that have become defunct, and we both bring some really good ones. So,
Mine, I should put an asterisk. Defunct coasters I wish I hadn't ridden. Because that's really not that coaster is.
yeah, yeah. So, and then even a little bit further down the road, we're going to have another question everything episode. This one's going to be focusing on ride elements and forces. And so I'm putting that shout out again. Remember, we're on all the socials. We're on Facebook, X, and Instagram. And then we have an email, coasterwarspodcast@gmail.com. It's linked in the description of every episode. And so with those question everything episodes, basically I'm gonna sit down and quiz Gabe. He's not allowed access to the internet or his phone. He's just gotta, kind of bullshit his way through that. And I'm gonna ask him questions. And so this is a really good opportunity for if you're not sure about something or you have a question to ask, you can go ahead and give that to me and I will pose it to Gabe. And we say there is no such thing as a stupid question. If you don't even know what a ride element is, well, let me tell you, boy, we'll sit you down and tell you.
Yeah, that's going to be a pretty good episode to listen to, ride element wise, because we kind of use those terms and stuff to describe the roller coasters that we're trying to talk about layout wise. So if we say this coaster has a corkscrew and you're like, I don't know what a corkscrew is, I'll have to try and explain it. However, it is going to be a struggle for me because I am terrible at explaining. Like, I could look at it and be like, that's a cobra roll, but to like explain it in words is gonna be fun. So yeah. But yeah, those will be some fun episodes for sure.
But with that, I will see, or we will see everybody next week.
Have a great day.